So welcome again to another Whisky Circus. Today we've got Kieran, who is Head of Whisky Discovery. I love these new titles that are popping up all over the place. Sounds very posh. He works for Whyte and Mackay. So what I'm going to do is hand you straight over to Kieran. He's going to hopefully give us an introduction to who he is, what work he does, and the brands that he looks after and works for. So over to you, Kieran.
Thank you. Thanks a million for taking the time. There are a number of faces that I haven't seen since the world starts. So it's really nice to see a few of you. Hopefully, as I'm looking forward to the kids going back in a week, we're getting back to somewhere. I am in the office, so if I stand up, I will be popping on my very designer mask. And as and when my friend comes in, we'll need to swap places. We are still very much in lockdown in Scotland, but thanks a million for taking the time. I thought what I would do is something completely different. So we do 100 tastings. Most of you have seen them, some of them last week. I thought I would just explain how everything fits together and then just do a completely open Q&A. If I can't answer your question, I'll let you know I can't answer it. But I might let you know privately afterwards what the answer would be, but I'll just be completely honest with you guys. There are a number of you for whom I just communicate through 210 characters, so it's nice to not be limited. But as my colleagues will tell you, my ability to go over 210 characters is quite famous. So if I become uninteresting or too long-winded, Claire, nominate you to stop me. So we're here. We're in Glasgow, clearly the best city, certainly in Scotland, anyway. And we are sat in the blending room. So I can slightly tilt my table. I might tilt my computer, give you a sense of what we're in. Oh, there we go. I don't know if you can see that, but there are samples of our whiskies everywhere. We are in the corner of our office in St Vincent Street in Glasgow, and we were about 100 meters from our last office and about 100 meters from the office before that. We're about 500 meters from the very, very first office, which is in the very desirable location of just below Central Station, Glasgow. And if you don't know Central Station, Glasgow, that is was home to some of the best nightclubs in Glasgow when I was a lot younger. It's now home to one of the best food places, the Platform. So we haven't moved very far from where we are. If I look out this way, I can see the cranes from the docks of the Clyde Bank area where ships like Queen Mary 2 set sail from. So if you imagine Glasgow in 1844 when we were founded, it was absolutely the center of empire, huge amount of ship building going on. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of whiskey brokers and bonds and all of those good things in Glasgow. And as time's gone on, the center of the whiskey universe has changed. So there's much more important what goes on in the Highlands and the Lowlands and Speyside and various other places than it is what goes on in Glasgow. But we're still in a city that's really important to Scotch. So our friends at Edrington are on the corner of Merchant Square, just by the Glasgow Museum of Art. Our friends at Edrington Beam Suntory, somewhere between them and us. And there's a whole lot of interesting stuff going on. So just down by the river, we've got a place where there will be brand new distillery coming up next to BBC Scotland and on that side. And that will be opposite the river to where the, I'm going to get them confused now, but the Clyde Bank distillery development there. So there's a lot going on in Glasgow, but there's a lot less that was going on in 1844. So what I thought I would try and do is stitch everything together, because I'm 99% sure if you hear from us, it's probably from something we want to talk about. We never explain how it all comes together. So I work for Whyte Mackay. Those of you that know Daryl and Stevie and Laura, Greg, Richard, we all work for Whyte and Mackay. And in the UK, that doesn't have the type of pedigree that perhaps what we do really reflects. So I don't know if you can see the glasses behind me. Can you see the shelf?
Mm-hmm.
Bit nod ahead if you can see the shelf.
Yep.
It's
a little bit light struck, but yeah.
All right. Well, let's not moan about that in Glasgow, okay? I'm not going to talk about the weather, but this is the first nice day we've had in a long time. So on the shelf behind me are basically the history of Whyte and Mackay blend bottles going all the way back. So if you look on the left-hand side, you can see our history. I don't know if you can see this. Claire, nod if you can see the detail of the lions on the glass. Can you see the lions? Yeah, okay, grand. Well, the lions 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 70 years ago were facing left. So much like our friends at a certain Diageo brand, we invested to make the lions face the other way and be a bit more prosperous. So if I move the computer, mask on. Can you see that? Yeah.
Yep.
As we go further towards more about now. So if Richard were here, he would say something very strong about when we went blue. There's quite a controversial decision in the blend history. If you, I'm looking. Can you see? This is I think this is around about the 70s. Then if you can see, there's actually a measure cap on top of the bottle of blend there.
Mm-hmm.
You won't see me using a measure cap too much these days, but that was pretty innovative of its time. And then going through, this is around about when we were sponsoring Leeds. And then through to the lines facing left. And then finally, the lines facing forward, the current bottle, and then the Whyte Mackay lights, which is definitely lit badly. You can see that though, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Grand.
Can I just point out, Kieran, when you are talking about Richard, we're talking about Richard Patterson.
Yes.
A lot of people will know the nose.
So, Richard Patterson. So Richard Patterson and the Patterson family are totally and utterly associated with that brand. If you talk to Richard, he will tell you that he can still smell the essence of going into the Bond about 50 meters actually from where the current office is today. And he will tell you really viscerally around how it felt at about, I don't know, 16, I think we technically say 18, that it was that he was going into the Bonds surrounded by all of this work that his father was doing. And he was completely taken away by the romance of it. So Richard became totally obsessed with whiskey, absolutely obsessed with whiskey. And he has been, probably he's the best calling card for anyone looking to work in whiskey that we could possibly have. He's totally infectious in the way that he talks about whiskey. He is definitely of a generation though, right? And there are a few, and we'll talk about Soren's latest article before I get asked about it, but we'll talk about representation and how whiskey's changing a little bit later on. But Richard definitely comes from that generation of being the first ambassador to really take whiskey out to the world. So you'll find whiskey collectors that are now in their 70s, men and women, especially in the States and in China and in Malaysia, who have been collecting whiskey all of that time. And they're collecting it primarily because of people like Richard Patterson, but also David Stewart, Jim Beveridge, all of that good stuff. So it was a great honor for me last year. We had great intentions. We love a party in whiskey. I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you come to an event, it normally involves food, occasionally comedy, and a lot of whiskey. So we had great intentions last year because Richard was celebrating 50 years at Whyte and Mackay. So most of these bottles, especially the bluer end and when the lions changed direction, that was a generation of Richard being the master distiller, master blender for Whyte and Mackay. So we'd intended to market with a big party. We were probably going to invite a lot more people than we did. In reality, all we were able to do, thanks to COVID, was to pop down to the coast where Richard lives now, hire a hotel room and have a maximum of 3 people in the room to celebrate this great man's 50 years at Whyte and Mackay, 56 years in industry. If anyone asks me, he was doing something just before he came here. Now, I've been working in digital a long time. I've worked in digital for big palaces and big sports companies, and I've been here for just about 4 or 5 years. And I've never had the pressure of organising Richard Patterson's 50th anniversary in COVID. So I had a mask on. I like tweed, so I was wearing my tweed suit, which in a small room, when you're quite stressed, was not a good idea. It wasn't the most, I don't think definitely didn't look very calm. And our CEO, Brian Donaghy, who used to work for Diageo, he's a really big figure in Scotch as well. He's our big boss. And then Margaret Nichol, who I'll talk about in a moment, and Richards were expecting this great celebration. So we started the celebration and we had 8 of the names I've mentioned. So people like Dave Stewart just dialed into a private call. Now that went kind of okay. People dialed in, they had a nice chat, lots of people in industry. And then we decided to be a bit more ambitious. So then we had a quick drink, and then we went to another call with all of the 500 people of Whyte and Mackay dialing in. And it was at that point that you realised you are in the middle of rural Scotland, Kieran, and the internet isn't that successful, not that reliable. And so whilst we were having a good chat in the room, the internet connection just started to go a wee bit Dalek. And yeah, it was from that point on that my relationship with Richard really came under some pressure, because we were just hoping that the internet would sort itself out, but it did sort itself out. And that was November the 30th last year, so in the middle of lockdown. So we celebrated Richard having 50 years at Whyte and Mackay. He has gone through something like 8 or 9 sets of owners. For any of you that have been in whiskey for a while, Whyte and Mackay isn't one of the biggest names 20 years ago. It wasn't one of the biggest names 10 years ago. It's really in the last 10 years that the investment has come through our new owners and our new strategy and all of that good stuff. But Richard has been through the various owners before that as the business was really growing. But it was also on that date, and this is my point, that we announced that Richard would step back a bit day to day, and that Greg Glass would now lead our day-to-day whiskey making. And Greg is here with me in the office today. So Greg and I both joined the business in or around about the same time. I think Greg was in the door before me. We are within a week of each other's birthdays, bang on the same age, and he is definitely a great person to work with. So whereas I went off and worked in digital and marketing in different sectors, Greg went off into the trees. He went up the mountain. He became a tour guide at his local distillery, which he was for a time the Dalmore. So he grew up in the Black Isle. So he's not yet had his big birthday, for anyone that's guessing. We're not there yet. He joined Whyte and Mackay in 2016. So for Richard, having spent 50 years working in whiskey and having looked at his father, Richard's kids are generally in medicine, which is a bit different. And thank God they are, especially after the year we've all been through. So for Richard to find someone new was an enormously big task. He spent a very, very long time looking, a lot of time meeting different people, different things. And what he decided in the end was that he really wanted somebody that didn't do things in the same way that he did. So before anyone makes a joke, I have never seen Greg throw whiskey on the floor. I have never seen Greg talk on a personal level to a glass of whiskey. That doesn't happen. It's not what he does. But that wasn't what Richard was looking for. When Richard set about looking for the next person to lead us forward over the next generation, he was looking for someone that shared that same ethos. So when you get them in a room, and to the point of my job is 90% of the time to be in a room with these two gentlemen and with Margaret as well, and work out what they're saying before we decide how much of it to let you guys in. There's a lot of waffle before we get to 10 words of greatness from Greg and Richard. But when Greg came into the business, Richard was very keen that it wasn't the same. So I have this same passion, the tendency for meetings to go on. There's a tendency for interviews to go on. There's a beautiful way of speaking. There's an absolute Scottish way of thinking about language. There's a real passion for it. We've just spent the last year of lockdown on a lot of video calls thinking about who are we and what do we do. And now that Greg's been in the business, what does that mean moving forward, and thinking about what we'll do moving forward. And I'll talk to you a bit about that in a little bit on. But yeah, so Greg came into the business in 2016. And it's at that point you start to see things change. It's at that point that we start to relaunch things. We launched Tamnavulin, which is a distillery that opened in '66. We relaunched that properly in 2016. So just as these two come together. But clearly that was in plan for a while, but that's when it happened. We launched Shackleton. Unlike me not to go 10 minutes without mentioning Shackleton, and I'm at 15, so well done me. Shackleton is my favourite brand. Not that I have favourites, and we're recording this, aren't we? So I shouldn't say that. I don't have favourites, depending on who I'm talking to. So yes, we relaunched Shackleton. We launched Tamnavulin. We launched Shackleton. We launched Jura, new range. We launched Fettercairn, new range. We repackaged Dalmore. There aren't any lions on any of these brands, so they were okay. We also launched new to world brands like Woodsman. And outside of whiskey, we launched Wildcat Gin, which is now also Wildcat Vodka. We launched Cane's Rum, all of those good things. So a lot has happened in the last 10 years. So if you look at that row of bottles, there isn't a lot of change until you get right to the end. And ignoring the moment they went blue, the moment they went black and then changed the lions, etc. That's when things really started to accelerate. I think every single decision that you're seeing come out now has come from Richard and a few other people that I mentioned in the last 10 years. We're going to have a quick drink. Are you with me so far?
Yeah, I'm still with you, don't worry.
Right.
I'll send you a text soon. Pepsi and whiskey.
I've told a few people on the call, Soren, that if I go on, give me a kick contact.
No, you're all right.
If you hear a buzz, you'll all know what's going on. Yeah, so it's 2016. We've moved from, there is a tower just over there. And if anyone is from Scotland, I'm not, I grew up all over the place. But yeah, if you're from Scotland and you've seen Glasgow, there is a tower that's about 30 stories tall that had Whyte and Mackay down the south side of it for ages. But we weren't there, so we've moved and they've taken the name off the side now. But as you come into Glasgow, one of the great benefits of really poor planning restrictions in 1970s in Glasgow is they put a motorway through the centre of the city. So they tore down all of these beautiful Victorian shops and arcades and buildings and all of that. And there's a motorway just here. But from a corporate branding perspective, it is not unuseful because we're very obviously in the centre of Glasgow, but it's not the centre of Glasgow that was. So 2016, we have Richard, we have Greg, but we also have probably, I think, the most important person in this business, who is our blend controller. And her name is Margaret Nicol. You won't hear her heard of very often, but she's a really good friend of mine. She lives around the corner and I'm going to talk about her just for 5 minutes because she's the unsung hero of everything we've achieved. And Richard would tell you the same. So our blend controller is the person that knows, with a little bit of help from a computer, but where every drop of our liquid is, where absolutely everything is. And I'm going to talk to you today about all 5 of our distilleries. And yes, I did say 5, but she looks after where across all of that, all of the liquid is. Her name is Margaret Nicol. And Margaret is about to celebrate 40 years at Whyte and Mackay. So we're really lucky as a business. We've got 2 people at the centre of our whiskey making team that have between them, 90 years worth of experience. And when you look at the IWSC awards, or the ISC awards, it's Margaret Nicol that all of these great whiskey makers are coming up to and talking to. She's absolutely the beating heart of our whiskey making over the last while. She's not here today. I'll send you a picture. So Margaret is at the heart of it. So 2016, you've got 3 people. You've also got distillery managers. So for us as a business, our relationship is a wee bit different. We're not the Whiskey Makers Show, although it might look like that. We definitely have a bit of a partnership going on. So quick nod of the heads if you've been to Jura. A few. Come again, but not for a while until we're safe. Sure, it's safe. Not for us, not for you, but for us really. So Jura, we have Graham Logan, ex-Royal Navy, quietest, most articulate man I've ever met. He's just done an episode of the podcast. You're welcome to check him out. So Graham runs a couple of shifts at Jura. So for every Jura release, we really see it as a bit of a partnership between whichever whiskey maker is leading and the person at the distillery. I'll talk to you about Jura in a bit. At Dalmore, up until recently, some of you will have met Stuart Robertson, so one of the great distillery managers in the whiskey industry. He's since moved on to be a consultant, and we have a new gentleman there called Mark Lancaster. But again, great partnership there. Down at Fettercairn, hopefully you've all met Stuart Walker, and if you haven't, please do. He's the most charming, honest person in the world. And for anyone that was on the tasting with me last week, he did genuinely tell me not to go running when I did have a bit of an accident with a hedge. In Fettercairn, so he's also quite sound sage advice. So Stuart is there, and then Tam Navulin, and again someone else we don't talk about. We have a lady called Joanne Reevely at Tam Navulin. She's not been there all that long. It was Gareth. Some of you will have met Gareth at previous festivals, and Joe is there running the ship at Tam Navulin. But what you find with everything that's happened is it's really a meeting of 2 minds. So everything these guys dream up in Glasgow, this is where it happens. It's quite a clinical room. We've got workshops where things are all over the floor, but I don't show you guys that because we're definitely not always adhering to all of the health and safety we should do. So we don't put it on camera very often. But a lot goes on in our gardens, in our sheds, in our garages, in our workshops. But we all come in here. This is where the work happens. So in reality, this is not the most creative place to create whiskies. So it's a partnership with these different places. So 2016, you've got 3 people. You've got 4 distillery managers. Who else do we have? Well, we also have a gentleman called Shane Healy. He's at ex-Diageo. Shane is our production director. So in theory, He ought to just be totally concerned with the science of the thing. But as you meet Shane as we go forward, and this is an open invite, when we get through this, we will meet Shane and we will have a laugh. We think we're probably distantly related due to the etymology of our name and where I'm from. But don't let that put you off. He's a great character. He is based up at Dingwall. He is in his spare time brewing beer in his double garage. Just Soren, you'd have some competition for the repurposing of garage space, I think. And he's up the road. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about him in a moment. So that's it. That's what's happening in 2016. All of these people weren't all there in 2016, but that's where it starts to happen. So quick nod of the heads if you have heard of Invergordon Distillery. Okay, so not everyone. So Invergordon is not the most attractive distillery that we own at Whyte Mackay. It was in the news on Friday. Did anyone see that? Okay, so Invergordon is our grain distillery. It's an absolutely outstanding grain distillery. The grain that comes out of Invergordon is fantastic. So this, I'll get names and details from Soren, but it's my hope that when we celebrate the 60th anniversary of Invergordon on the 21st of July this year, that we will have something to share with friends of the family, which would include all of you, unless you ask me difficult questions. So that be an incentive for you. So Invergordon Distillery is 60 years old. It's mammoth. It's not as big as Girvan. It's not as big as Cameron Bridge. But what it does have is this most stunning location on the Cromarty Firth in Scotland. So Invergordon Distillery, 6 years old on the 21st of July. That is home to Shane Healy, the aforementioned passionate Irishman. It's also home to a few really important parts of our business, and that's where we get into Shackleton. So Shackleton whiskey doesn't have a home, but if it did, it would be the very ugly Invergordon Distillery. So Invergordon Distillery is on the Cromarty Firth. It's huge. It's where the port of Cromarty Firth is now for something like, I'm making this number up, but it's about 30,000 tourists. So the Cromarty Firth is such a deep water channel that it gets a lot of cruise ships that come in. Now, I don't know where any of you live. Actually, I do know where some of you live, but this is not Yorkshire. Like this is brutal, mechanical engineering in Invergordon. It's a really important part of Scottish infrastructure and industry. It's a really fantastic place once you get beyond it. But for 30,000 people, they're getting off the cruise ships and they're seeing us, not looking our best. It's not Jura, but they come off and they see it. So it's a really important part of the tourist scene in north of Scotland. And on Friday, we announced that's where we're working with Diageo and Glenmorangie on a feasibility study for hydrogen power. And that's in the news, so have a wee look. But yeah, we're massively excited about that. And it's been supported by Scottish Power and the Cromarty Firth Port Authority. So that's all across the news. So there's this notion that we have to find a way of making whiskey sustainable. Like we are not a big polluting industry at all, but we do have work to do to make it as sustainable as we can do. I think most of you are aware that due to water shortages in the summer, a lot of single malt whiskey distilleries stop producing whiskey, and it's becoming more complicated to manage that aspect of sustainability. This aspect that we're talking about with hydrogen power has nothing to do with that. Hello, Mr. Gary's son. This is exciting. I came into the office so the girls wouldn't be on the camera. Hi. How you doing? Son or daughter? I can't see. Feast messages popped up. I can't see you all now. There we go. All right. This is interactive. This is.
That's youngest, number 3 daughter.
Daughter, I do apologise. Although I've just cut Amelia's hair this morning and she's looking more and more like my son. Right. This is recorded, isn't it? Damn.
Yeah. Don't worry.
Funny because it's true. Lockdown. What joy. So, Invergordon. So this is where we're based. Invergordon Distillery. It's a really fun place to come and find out how whiskey is made. It's grown up organically, so we've had lots of bits bolted on. It looks a lot like, I don't know if you remember the Waterworld film with Mel Gibson. It wasn't a classic film, but Invergordon looks a little bit like that shit does. Like there's just lots of things that were well intended. We're going through a process of rejuvenating that. And it's a really important part for Shackleton, because that's where our PhD scientists are based. That's where the people that do the actual chemical analysis of our liquid base. So everything you see here in these kinds of bottles, they get shipped down from Invergordon, and Greg, Mags and Richard do the nosing here. So we have an analysis that goes on for our liquid here and the science that goes on there. So if you go back to 2007, we are in a situation where we're contacted by the Antarctic Heritage Trust in New Zealand. That's where the charity is based. And they said, we think we found something you would be interested in. Gets through to Richard. They found crates of McKinley's Old and Rare. And I'm just looking, I think we've taken it out of the cabinet. Yeah, I definitely don't see it, Mike. So McKinley's Old and Rare is one of the brands that existed from when we were founded all the way through to now. It's not a brand that we've been producing for a while, and it's not a brand that we would necessarily bring back. But this whiskey was found underneath Shackleton's hut. And what's interesting is that it had survived. So it was obviously Antarctica's quite cold. And the whiskey and the crate and the straw and everything with it had been encased in the ice underneath Shackleton's hut. So things to know, and this is where the PhD science comes in. You're unable to take whiskey off Antarctica because of the various international protections for that place. You can't even take a drop of ice, like it's completely and utterly protected. And it's slightly horrific seeing the stories of how much ice is disappearing off into the sea these days. But, you know, going back a while, it was really very much not in the news. So they syringed through the cork a vial of this whiskey, and it came back to Invergordon. The most incredible set of labs. You wouldn't know they were there. They are on the railway line. So we have a railway line that comes right through Invergordon. If you go north of the railway line, that's where all of our epic warehousing is for the whole company. And if you look south, that's where the grain distillery is and our admin offices. The science bit of Invergordon is right on the railway line. It's completely and utterly nondescript, but it's in there that they start to do the chemical analysis of this fantastic find from Antarctica. So they're analysing it, and they're talking to Mags, who I mentioned, and to Richard. And they're saying, right, this is what we have. What can we do with this? And we're like, well, but it is our whiskey. Like, it's whiskey that our forebears created, gave to Shackleton to go to Antarctica. We can't just not do anything with this. And there's also marketing voices in our business that are thinking we probably ought to do something with this. So they set about recreating it. But the distilleries that had existed when the whiskey was created in 1900s, I guess, I might get my dates mixed today. I've got a lot in my head to try and share with you. The distilleries will generally close. So we're in and around Inverness. Now, Inverness today is a very different place to what it was, but it was full of small and medium scale distilleries back at the time that were being fed into the big blending houses of Scotland. Bearing in mind, we're talking about a period in Scotch history where nobody was really drinking malt. Malt wasn't considered to be Scotch as blends were. Blends were the business. So when we got the vial back, we were unable to just go and grab the liquid that existed to make that again. It just didn't exist in those volumes. We did have, and I can't tell you what, but we did have some access to some elements of what had gone into the original Shackleton whiskey that he had in order to then recreate it. So then what you have is here in Glasgow, in the old building, but here in Glasgow, you have Richard, you have Mags, nosing, tasting, analysing lots of different options based on this vial that's come from Antarctica. And then up at Invergordon, you've got scientists looking at the chemical breakdown of what that looks like. And it's also going to external houses for authenticity and checks and balances and all of that good stuff. And that leads you to McKinley's Old and Rare, McKinley's batch 1. There were 2 batches of McKinley's and then no more. So McKinley's, if you find it, is a fantastic, and it's available in France through the Maison de Whisky. It's our recreation of that antique whiskey that had gone to Antarctica and been found. They tried to get the original, was it purely on the lab results? Well, we knew that we were able to ascertain, I say we, Richard was able to ascertain which distilleries were likely to have contributed to that end result. And we have some of the batch books that told us which casks had been swapped and all of that good stuff in our history, but we didn't have all of it. But between Richard and the scientists, we were able to ascertain what were likely to have gone into the original whiskey that went, which then, you know, it was kind of back from there. There were things that are true. So we knew for sure where we were buying from on an annual basis. We just weren't necessarily buying all of the same whiskies all of the time to go into McKinley's. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely good value for money, but let me come on to that. So McKinley's number 2 was more of a PR push. It was, we'd proven that we could do it. We were looking at creating something second time around. And then it was at that point, probably the person you never meet. I think Clay might have been in the same room as him, but Stephen Pearson is our chief marketing person. It's the person that hired me. He was involved in hiring Greg. He's a very quiet, understated marketeer. He's not your chief evangelist, cheerleader type marketing person, but he's absolutely spot on when it comes to what we create. He is the person behind a lot of what you've seen come out in the last 10 years, or I'll say 10 years. I think he's been here about 8 years. In the last 8 years, Stephen's had a hand in that. So Stephen starts saying, well, hang on a minute. Why are we creating a whiskey that can only be drunk in small numbers? That's not really us. Like we've got a big blend and a big malt in Jura. That's not really what we do. We're not, you know, there's a really important role for independent bottling. We really believe in that, but that's not us. So what could we do that's a bit more mainstream? And it's at that point I ought to mention the first part of what brings us all together across everything we do. So we're really interested in bringing new people into the category. I'm fully cognizant of the role Dalmore plays and reinforcing a perceived perception of what whiskey is. Like Dalmore, along with other big brands, has had a hand in building all of the stereotypes that Scotch suffers from. You know, it was there then and it's there now, and we're doing something about it. But that's not really us. We like to think of ourselves being much more of a community-minded organisation. There are only 500 of us. Like 500 is not a big number in Scotch. The difference between us and the next biggest company is huge, but also the difference between us and the one the other way is huge as well. So we know we're big, but we're not big. We know we know everyone by name. We pretty much, and in most cases, if you're part of the Glasgow organisation, you know,